Welcome to the launch event of our Invest Minneapolis-St. Paul report. You're about to watch Panel 3 on Economic Development, The Sky's the Limit. Enjoy.
Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure for us to be here, and I want to say to Abby and the team at Captain Analytics, what a pleasure it's been to work with them. They've been absolutely fantastic, working with us to make sure that we're able to present the best that Bloomington has to offer, and really appreciate their partnership over the last few months. One of the things that we thought about when we decided to partner for Invest MSP in 2023 is the fact that Bloomington has really flown under the radar for the last 40 years. You may think to yourself, really? That doesn't sound quite right. But the fact is, we've taken a pretty passive approach to economic development. For those real estate professionals in the room, we have had, for the last 60 years, the advantage of location. Front step of the airport, the busiest corridor in the Twin Cities, 494. Every county in the state of Minnesota has a vehicle that traverses that corridor every day, right? And so we haven't had to work very hard. But the fact is that things are changing, right? The world is changing. We all know that. So you may think you know about Bloomington, and I'm here to tell you, you don't know Bloomington. So that's part of what I want to talk about this morning. So, first of all, I'm going to let you all in a little secret. According to the federal government, this regional metropolitan statistical area is the Minneapolis-St. Paul Bloomington. Brought my cheering section. And so we've actually been using the phrase the Tri-Cities instead of the Twin Cities, right? Now, I think, frankly, the biggest barrier to that catching on is we'd have to rename our Major League Baseball team the Minnesota Tris, and I'm not sure that's going to happen. So, why is it that this is the Minneapolis-St. Paul Bloomington statistical area? It's because Bloomington has been a critical contributor to the economic success of this region for decades. Bloomington is the fourth largest city in the state, has a strong employment market. That's 2 jobs for every city resident in the workforce. We have thriving tourism, hospitality sectors, a diverse economy, and it's a place to enjoy a great quality of life. One of the things we're most proud of is for nearly 20 years, we've had a AAA bond rating. Right? That means that the 3 major credit agencies, Fitch, Moody's, and S&P, have given Bloomington its highest credit rating every year. We're one of only 32 cities in the whole country that can say that. And we've been able to say that for almost 20 years. From healthcare and hospitality to technology and manufacturing, Bloomington continues to see recent reinvestment through corporate headquarters, corporate international headquarters, such as Donaldson Companies in Toro. We also have major headquarters at Health Partners, Thermo King, Dairy Queen International. And just last year, we cut the ribbon on the new North American headquarters for SICK AG, a 75-year-old German company that specializes in producing optical sensors. They saw the potential in Bloomington. They made the decision to reinvest there because of the opportunities that we present. We've been a pivotal driver for the regional economy for 4 decades, as I mentioned. The most significant economic activity in recent years has been in the continual work to build out the South Loop District, which is that area along 494 just south of the airport, around this little place called the Mall of America. You might have heard of it. And you think back 40 years ago when major sports in this market all moved to the core cities. Right? That had been the signature thing about Bloomington back then, other than the Rusty Scupper and the Lincoln Dell. So we had to revision who we are. And the city council showed a lot of courage and foresight and vision back then by partnering with the Grimasians and the Simons to bring Mall of America to life. 31 years now, we've had Mall of America. Right before COVID, most visited attraction in the United States, more than 40 million people a year going through the doors. Right? So we are a major center of hospitality, more than 40 hotels, nearly 10,000 hotel rooms, about a quarter of the entire accommodations for hospitality in the region is in Bloomington. So our strengths are developed not through competition. We look at our existence in this region as an exercise in co-opetition. Okay? We're focused on continuing to develop Bloomington in ways that are good for our region and that add value for the whole region. One of those ways is something that I am really excited about. I'm also getting a little anxious about it. You may have seen, if you get the Axios morning newsletter, it was the first item this morning that Bloomington and Minnesota, United States, are one of 5 finalists to host the Expo 2027. If you're not familiar with Expo, find the colors here. That's the World's Fair. We haven't had a World's Fair in the United States since 1984. We have a couple generations of Americans that have grown up not understanding the importance and the history of the World's Fair. And so we've organized around a theme of healthy people, healthy planet, and we're hoping to host in 2027. And just 20 days from now, we're going to find out if that's the case. But who's counting, right? So Minnesota and the Twin Cities region, that theme of healthy people, healthy planet has an incredible ecosystem for health and for medical sectors, everything from manufacturing to research and delivery. And you combine that with our high quality of life indicators, we have the healthiest lifestyle in the nation with some of the highest rated park systems that encourage active lifestyles. Hat tip to Minneapolis and St. Paul, who have 2 of the best park systems in the whole country. They're ranked that way every year. But if you think you know Bloomington, you don't know Bloomington. 1/3 of our city's acreage is green space. Okay, so we're right there, stand up in terms of having excellent outdoor opportunities. However, the core interest for us in Expo is the potential development that accompanies the World's Fair. We've seen cities like Paris and Seattle, Chicago, and San Antonio. World's Fairs can have a dramatic impact on the built environment. So being centered in Bloomington's South Loop District, we view Expo 2027 as a way to provide a tremendous transformative catalyst for economic development, not just in Bloomington, but in this region and in this state. Some of our more recent efforts are focused on another area that if you think you know Bloomington, you don't know Bloomington, right? We happen to be the epicenter of the semiconductor business here in the state of Minnesota. We have at least 4 major companies who are operating in this sphere. They're all keenly interested in the recent passage of the CHIPS Act by the federal government. And all of them are looking at major investment. If they all proceed with plans that they're talking about, we could have hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in the region. They are a vibrant subsector of our local economy, and they're a major driver of our regional economy. Mayor Bussey, who couldn't be here today, so humble brag, he was at the French ambassador residence yesterday in DC, attending a symposium on water infrastructure and also networking on Expo to try and encourage support. He was meeting with our U.S. senators this morning. So the mayor is determined to convene groups in the semiconductor industry to participate in this regional initiative with Greater MSP, working to ensure that our economic sector in that space can access those CHIPS Act funding. We're really appreciative of the Greater MSP and DEED for the role that they've played to try to drive that investment. This is a growth industry. Those businesses thrive in our community. They also have numerous needs that go just beyond financial investment. They have expansion needs, whether it's in space and especially in workforce, which is why the mayor has formed a labor task force to make sure that we're continuing to provide the pipeline for businesses with those human resources needs. Our city also has a new strategic plan underway called Bloomington Tomorrow Together, with a mission to cultivate an enduring and remarkable community where people want to be. Some of the key priorities of our plan are to promote equitable economic growth and to make Bloomington a welcoming place to do business. One of the initiatives that we're really proud of is Bloomington's first small business development center that's already underway. We're supporting early stage entrepreneurship by transforming a former fire station into a space that will conduct small business enterprise and business development, with a focus on creating ways for minority-owned and women-owned businesses to successfully start and grow. Now, these efforts are consistent with our city council's initiative focused on equity and inclusion in all decision-making. Our council is also committed to making sure that we view all of our decisions through the lens of sustainability, through the lens of health for all, and making sure that Our bedrock foundation of outreach and engagement means that people who are affected by the decisions we make have a voice in the decisions being made. So the Small Business Development Center has received $2 million already in funding from organizations including the American Rescue Plan, Knight Foundation, Hennepin County, and our city's own Creative Placemaking Commission and Housing and Redevelopment Board. We're expecting to have the grand opening in fall of 2024, and I would love to invite all of you to attend. So our city, our region is strong. You all know that. We're in good position to take advantage of the many, many opportunities that are ahead of us. I want to also hit on a couple of things. So Mayor Fry talked about his talking points and how he deviated from him, from his. Janine, our communications coordinator, and our team has put together talking points, which I've tried to follow more closely than the mayor. But there's some things that I really want to emphasize too. This whole ecosystem of being a thriving, successful community is more than just business, right? It's about having places that people can live, right? And so we've been really focused on housing that's affordable. A couple of years ago, our city council took the visionary step of adopting what we call an opportunity housing ordinance. In the last 4 years, we're averaging 900 new units of multifamily housing being built. We are already more than 85% of our way to the Met Council's 2030 goal for affordable housing in our community, which, as Mayor Bussey likes to say, is about 85% more than every other community in this area. Right? There is not another city outside of our core cities doing more to advance housing that's affordable than Bloomington. We also just passed an innovative single and two-family zoning ordinance. We exist in a built environment. There is an opportunity for us to add new housing. So we have to find new and creative ways to add new housing stock that's going to ensure that people have an opportunity to get in on home ownership, which is the best way for middle class to build generational. So if you aren't in Bloomington, if you aren't living there, in our first apartment to your sunset years and some quality housing, if you are not there in our starter homes, to our executive homes, you're missing out. If you're not doing business in Bloomington, especially in our small business community, which is really strong to our multinational businesses, you're missing out. If you're passionate about the arts and you're not in Bloomington, we have some of the region's best arts at our Center for the Arts and elsewhere. We're the first city in the country that created a creative placemaking commission to make sure that arts and artists are at the center of community development. If you're not in Bloomington enjoying the arts, you're missing out. If you aren't there recreating, I mentioned the parks earlier, we have the only urban wildlife refuge in the country. We have the Highland Richardson Bush Lake Regional Park area. We have the Minnesota River Trail and the Old Cedar Avenue Bridge. If you're not recreating in Bloomington, you're missing out. That's what we have to offer the region. This region, Minneapolis-St. Paul and Bloomington, can compete with metropolitan regions across the country for jobs, talent, and for investment. We're really excited to be here alongside our peers to present the advantages of our region. We're going to continue to cooperate. We're going to continue this theory of coopetition to make sure that we're advancing the interests of Bloomington, but also advancing the interests of the Tri-Cities area. So let's envision what we'd like to see for our future together. So I'm really glad that I've been able to kick off this third panel titled "The Sky's the Limit." How appropriate that theme, because for Bloomington and the state of Minnesota, I really believe that everything is possible and there's really no limit to the growth that can take place. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having us today. Make sure you check our website.
Hello, everyone. It's still morning. I'm gonna make this quick. My kids on last day of schools today, so I have to get to the field day to do some tug of war and eat popsicles at 1. So make sure to stay on time. Let's go ahead and sit down there. My notes are. Well, thank you, Jamie, for kicking us off. And as mentioned, this panel number 3 is Sky's the Limit, the changing, and I want to focus on the word changing, considerations around development and how that impacts the state's economy. Before we get to the first question, I'm going to just try to set the stage with a summary of a couple of kind of themes I've heard today to tie some of this together, and then also introduce our panelists. So one thing I really appreciated was the comment from Dan in the first panel that this is our time and the real focus on value and value-based business. And I'd like to talk a little bit about development as it relates to value-based business. And in the second panel, the creation of a qualified workforce, development, of course, in space. I'm an architect. Space does, obviously impact how we develop our qualified workforce. And then Jamie's comment on creating an enduring and remarkable community that people are meant to be. I really appreciate that comment, and hopefully the conversation on development will focus on that. So my name is Jennifer Christiansen. I am the managing director. I'm not actually the CEO of Perkins & Will. The CEO of Perkins & Will is Phil Harrison. He sits in Atlanta, but I am the managing director of the Minneapolis studio, Perkins & Will. And Minneapolis, our purpose in Minneapolis is designed for the greater good. And so the work we do is really focused on equity and sustainability. And I did write something for each of you, but I'm going to have you each introduce yourselves if you don't mind, because I think it'll go quicker. We have a lot to get through. So I'm going to ask the first question, and then as you answer, just please introduce yourself. So the first question is about macroeconomics and as it, how they relate to what we're seeing here in Minneapolis and opportunities. So we seem to be in a time where there's greater state and federal involvement in economic development. Federally, there's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which, as you all know, is $108 billion, primarily focused on transportation. The Inflation Reduction Act, as well as CHIPS, which is creating helpful incentives to produce semiconductors. I'm sure you've all heard of that. Minnesota holds a multi-billion-dollar surplus in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, have explored different ways to keep rental prices affordable. With everything underway, and these macroeconomic kind of trends, what do you see as the opportunities and the projects that you're looking to prioritize? Patrick, I'll start with you after you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for moderating this panel. I just want to thank Perkins & Will for a lot of great work that we've been involved with your members of your team. My name is Patrick Sieve. I'm the Executive Director of Destination Medical Center, which is Minnesota's largest economic development initiative in its history. Largest economic development initiative in Minnesota's history. And what makes it special is a few things. One is that it's place-based. So it's organized in Rochester as a state initiative. So it happens in Rochester, but it's a state initiative. Secondly, it's based on authentic nature of our community. So it's home to Mayo Clinic, the #1 healthcare provider in the world. Let that sink in for a minute. The #1 healthcare provider in the world located in Minnesota. And it is a long term, it's a 20-year time horizon. So it doesn't try to, it's not a one and done, it's a 20-year time horizon. And it is using public infrastructure. So you talk about state and federal resources. It's using public infrastructure as a strategy to stimulate private and support private investment. So it's authentic, it's long-term, it's place-based, and it is based on the core characteristics of our community. So I think in all of the conversation we heard from Jamie from Bloomington, this notion of Minnesota collaborating as communities and as a region, I think is really beginning to pay off in a significant way. So I'll leave it at that, Jennifer. And
I think we'll talk more when I ask you a specific question about the work in Rochester.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Barrett. I am the CEO of Doran Companies. We are a local developer, architecture firm, construction and management company. We are one of the top 3 largest women-owned businesses in the state, and we are the biggest women-owned general contractor in the country, as far as we know. And I think, there's the really interesting thing about the development community here is the exceptional amount of talent that exists in this market. I mean, we have a number of different firms, development firms, but also architecture firms, construction companies that are active across the whole country, but based here. And, many of the development firms are more active in other markets than here. And so, what I see on a large scale that existed before the pandemic and continues to exist today is just an enormous amount of talent and insight among the development community that can be applied to continue to develop really high quality projects here. And everything from how other regions, how other cities are, approaching large scale development, how they're partnering with developers to design, to what's happening with rents. All of that is at our fingertips in this community right now today, which is really an amazing thing and a fantastic opportunity, but also something I think that we really do need to focus on as we think about development, in the future, this next phase. What do we want our community to be, and how do we want to really create an environment to foster the right development in the right places?
Thank you. I have to say, the complexity of this conversation and the detailed questions that Jennifer sent us, I'm surprised no one else has notes. So my name is Tim Carl. I'm the CEO at HJ. I'm also a design principal, so work on projects every year. So I have a really simple response to this question. I think what we're seeing is in large part due to the Inflation Reduction Act, in large part due to how the Security and Exchange Commission is engaging in ESG. Everyone knows what ESG stands for. I'm seeing lots of lines. Environment, social, and governance. The way in which this has evolved just in the last year, we're seeing so many clients and developers stepping up to really take on sustainability, carbon tracking, reporting, and carbon reduction. We're now having clients tell us they're not going to hire us if we aren't actually committing to our own reduction. So that's just been an amazing evolution that we've seen at a really fast pace. The other thing I'll say that we're hearing from clients, which is really good news, is the best organizations, you all know this, if you want to hire the best people, they have expectations that you are taking sustainability and equity very seriously. So if your firm is not actually looking at the pathway to your profession or your organization in an equitable way, you are not going to be hiring the best people, and you're not going to be prepared to do your best work. So, anyway.
Hey, Tim, I do notes too, so.
Unfortunately, you wrote large enough so I can read your. I'm Steve Cranbrown, this is the CEO of the Minneapolis Downtown Council and Downtown Improvement District. And Jennifer, I guess the way I would think about your question is in terms of downtown Minneapolis, which is my focus, and the journey we've been on for the last 3 years. I would say in the early months after the stay-at-home order hit, I was just trying to keep the wheels on the road, just kind of cut it out. And then we went to a stage of just trying to stand back up and to see office workers come back. Given, as earlier panel said, it's not going to be like it was before, but we began to see that happening, events occurring, people coming back downtown, beginning to understand that it's really safe here to participate in all that downtown has to offer. But now, more specifically, answer your question, I think we're at a stage where we're looking forward and looking at what the possibilities are moving from here. There are definite changes that we'll have to adjust to, look at those more as opportunities than threats, but there are also some enduring strengths that will help us move forward. And we just came off this amazing legislative session, incredible amount of investment on the one hand, on the other hand, an incredible amount of business regulation. So it's going to be fascinating from a private sector standpoint to see how that all measures out, and kind of what the world looks like in Minnesota a year or two from now in terms of this legislative session.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, I'm looking forward to looking forward for the Minneapolis-St Council as well. And you did mention just looking at trends across the country, and I wanted to give you a moment if you are seeing things. One of my questions was actually, are there any factors competing growth in other markets that you've noticed and where are the steps your organization are taking so that Minnesota avoids that. But I think you could also say, are there things you're seeing that are happening around the country that you're looking at to potentially give us some vision as well. And I think Patrick will talk to you also about that and what you're doing in Rochester to inspire Minneapolis. But Anne, do you have any comments on that?
I do. I think, you know, one of the things that I think can be really, really hard is that you can plan, you can, you know, be very clear and focused when you're developing strategy, when you're writing zoning ordinances and you're finalizing your comprehensive plan as cities. But when it actually comes to then taking a development and moving it through the approvals process, that sometimes that focus can shift a bit. And I think that, you know, we're seeing this in every market. You see it here. The development inherently is about change. And so when you're driving change, you're always going to have people that are not on board, you know, whether that's a neighborhood group or, you know, whatever. And so I think that can sometimes create a ton of muddiness and make things very difficult. So, you know, one of the things that I've seen is that the cities and the regions that really hold true to what their vision is and they're clear about it, they're relatively unapologetic about it, they're clear with developers about it, you know, they're able to be really effective driving the kind of development that they want to see. When it's less clear, it actually, I think, you end up with developments that maybe aren't quite as bold. You know, they're not a stretch. People aren't really thinking outside the box. And so, you know, I think it's a challenge because you have to be willing on the front end to say, I'm not necessarily going to be a consensus builder. You know, I'm going to have a vision. This is where we're going to go. And so that would be my challenge, you know, to our community here is that we have to decide what we're going to do, and we have to move forward and be okay with the fact that not everyone is going to be on board and agree, you know, with that vision as it's executed.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, you know, purpose-driven change management, actually, some of those, you know, being able to coach folks through change, and then engagement. And engagement is something that we're seeing a lot more of, real intentional engagement within the design projects where we're reaching out to communities and really getting clarity from the stakeholders very early on, you know, even kind of before the project begins. So I think that also ties to some of what you've been saying. So I do have a question for each individual, and Patrick, so Destination Medical Center works with the Mayo Clinic, and I actually hadn't written this in there, but I'm going to add the city of Rochester because there's really those three entities working together to identify the needs in Rochester and how to best address them for continued growth. How are the public-private partnerships going to be an essential kind of aspect of navigating the environment? And how can some of what you're doing in Rochester sort of be seen as a potential inspiration for what we do in Minneapolis, in the city of Minneapolis?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So first of all, I do want to just point out a couple of colleagues from Mayo who are here, Dr. Noseworthy and Dr. Abidaya, who lead business development in Mayo Clinic, great partnerships. And one thing I'll say, when you have the #1 healthcare organization in the world in your hometown, that's a good thing. But what's even better is when the leadership of that organization is continuing to innovate, so they continue to be the #1 healthcare organization in the world. And that's what we have as a partner and alongside the work we do. But they know they can't do it alone, and they don't want to do it alone. They want to do it in partnership. And that is why this DMC initiative was born. It was, we plan to stay here, we plan to grow here. You heard conversation recently in the last few weeks about planned, significant planned growth that they're working on, upwards of $4 billion. And so they know that they don't want to be the only one leading the work in Rochester. And so I think the idea of partnerships is critically important. I think the other thing I want to say about what we're learning out of the Destination Medical Center initiative that can be helpful to other communities, including Minneapolis or St. Paul or Mankato or Bloomington, is How do you engage the community through things like co-design? How do you tap into the rich diversity of voices in the community while holding true to a big aspirational vision? And I think that's really the nexus of being visionary, but inclusive in the process. And I think that has been a big learning for us, and I think something that we've been navigating and have found a lot of success with.
Thank you. I know that the transit work, the public realm work, and the housing work are all coming together.
It's connecting all of those. Employment demands means more housing demands, means more mobility demands. One thing before I give away the microphone, because I may not be able to talk again. I look over at the Bloomington table, and a lot of new friends in Bloomington. I joined them on their expo bid recently because it is a statewide initiative. It happens to be located, it's located in Bloomington because they raised their hand and said, we will host it, but it is a statewide opportunity. And they stole one of our great team members from Rochester, Holly Basic, to be a part of their team. But we believe in you guys, and we're going to support you, and we hope we have our fingers crossed for June 21st as well.
And so multifamily and build for rent communities seem to be one of the more robust sectors of real estate market today. Between interest rates, affordability concerns, and housing demand, are there any implications for the concept of home ownership that we should be aware of?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the things that we've seen with the multifamily development, now you're really seeing it with build for rent development that's happening in our community and around the country, is there's multiple, I guess it's sub-markets within rental that I think we need to start talking about, and not just group all rental housing into the same bucket, because rental housing is now in a really, I think, positive way, meeting the needs of many different housing groups' housing needs. And so build for rent is single family homes that are built as rentals. And when you think about, let's just say, a first time home buyer, someone that has the income to afford a significant mortgage payment every month, they don't have the down payment. They don't want to buy a fixer upper. There's a market for someone who wants to live in a new nice home but cannot afford to do that through the traditional channels. And I think that is going to continue to exist. I mean, when we look at what's happening with interest rates and what will be required of first-time home buyers, that is not going to change anytime soon, and it will continue to drive rental single-family home developments. What's really, I think, cool about these communities as they're built, and they're all around. You wouldn't necessarily know that a community is a rental community. There's usually not signs or anything. They're just built to rent. There was sort of the stigma with a house within a development. Oh, that's the rental house. They're not going to be here for very long. When it's the whole community, that same kind of rich community building that we see happening organically at multifamily buildings with different generations and different people that otherwise wouldn't interact is happening in these built for rent communities, and it's really cool. So I think we'll continue to see growth on that front. Multifamily, we'll continue to see the growth there in probably more in the suburban markets where there's some walkability, there's an ability for people to remain within their area, same grocery store, same place of worship, but they want to change their lifestyle and not own a home anymore. And so I think, those factors have driven development the last few years, and we're seeing them continue to drive development today.
Right. I have two questions, and I'm just going to state what they are. Maybe you and I can talk later, but I think the office conversion to housing and how that affects some of what's going on, and also the rent control, but that's maybe something we can talk about offline, because I do want to get back to Tim and talk about carbon. As I know, as an architect as well, construction is one of the most carbon intensive industries out there. As client preferences and environmental regulations evolve, how do you see the architecture and construction industries responding, and where do you see the greatest innovation taking place?
So Jennifer told me earlier that her sustainability leader wrote a 2-page answer to this question. So I'm happy to share our answer if you share your answer. So actually our sustainability leader is in the audience today, so I'm under a lot of pressure to answer this question. The greatest innovations we're seeing right now take place really in the design process. So of course, we have to address the functional needs of our clients in terms of the space we're designing, but we're taking it beyond that. I mean, every good firm is taking it beyond that and really looking at this more holistically. And right now we're looking at, in addition to function, 3 other lenses really that are intersecting in ways that we actually hadn't predicted. So obviously looking at sustainability, and I'll just simplify the definition and say carbon footprint, and I'll come back to that. We're looking at resilience. We have to be designing the built environment to mitigate the impact of climate change. We know what's coming in the future. And then equity. We have to be designing the built environment to address the diversity of the communities that we're serving in ways that quite frankly, our industry has not in the past, and we know that. One of the things that's really interesting that we're discovering is that traditionally, at least I'll say architects have looked at carbon footprint sustainability through 2 different lenses. It's the embodied carbon in the construction and the materials, and then it's the operational carbon in the actual operations of the building. And we've tried to just, measure and understand both of those, but we haven't actually looked at them together. And we have to look at them together to make sure that the design has an overall holistic footprint that is meeting the expectations and obviously meeting the needs. There's a fantastic, the American Institute of Architects has put together what they're calling the AA 2030 Challenge, where we have to reduce the footprint of the built environment by an amazing percentage by 2030. If we're gonna stop this progression of climate change, we're discovering that things like triple glazing great in terms of performance, but also have an embodied footprint, right? So you really have to look at more detail. Where there's new tools out there right now that you can actually very quickly understand the combination of the both and make better decisions. And I'll just say the last thing I'll say in terms of this overall discussion, how that then impacts how we evolve, bring back, for instance, downtown Minneapolis. So many buildings that need to be reused. And by far and large, the best path is to reuse existing buildings from a carbon footprint standpoint. That said, not every building is going to be able to be used. We heard that today from our mayor. And not the reuse of every building doesn't necessarily address the carbon footprint at the level that it needs to. So it's a much more complicated. If we look at it holistically, it's just more complicated, and we're getting into that right now with our clients. So.
That's great, thank you, Tim. And you had 3 main points. I was able to narrow down the summary I have from our sustainable into 5, and I'll share them with you later. So, and that's a good segue into the conversation with Steve about what we do with downtown and what we are going to imagine the future of downtown. And before I ask you your question, I actually wanted just to read a quote from the AIA, American Institute of Architects Minnesota has a magazine they publish monthly called Enter. And this past month, there was a really great article I'm happy to share called Latent Downtowns. And it was a quick article that talked about how we reimagine downtowns. And this quote by John Commerce was in there. One of the essential revelations of the pandemic is that downtown districts are vulnerable when the uses are uniform. And so I think that ties a lot to what has been said today about diversity, convergence, about all of these different types of programs that actually all of us have been talking about coming together downtown and how we imagine that. So Steve, downtowns across the country, don't move my post-it a second, are struggling to keep tenants, and there appears to be a brewing storm over the valuation of some of those once busy buildings. Office to residential conversions are pricey, and actually maybe not possible sometimes, but seem to offer a lifeline that other cities and states have started to further develop. What is happening in our downtown, and are there big changes for what the concept means and what they look like? How should policymakers respond?
Well, it sounds like it's already been addressed a little bit by the mayor and Tim certainly as well, but I'd like to point out that even before all of this, we've had examples of conversions. Van office tower, now Grand Hotel, beautiful hotel with wonderful restaurants. Sioux Line office tower, now the Sioux Line Apartments. Sherman Associates just closed on the acquisition of the North Star East office, and they're gonna convert into a couple hundred units. So past and current, we are doing this already. There is a focus on this issue. I'm sure the mayor talked about it because he talks about it all the time. The development community in Minneapolis and the commercial real estate community is looking very carefully at which buildings are most suitable from an age in order to qualify for historic tax credits, a fiscal configuration standpoint for the actual practicality of conversion. And you know, how we can move forward with this as one among many solutions to making sure our downtown stays vibrant. So it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to be every building, as Tim mentioned, but it certainly can be a handful. And I think there are a couple of attributes to that. One, these are buildings that are located closer to the core, and so we begin to grow our residential population, which has been growing dramatically in the greater downtown, in the core CBD as well. And inevitably, these are expensive projects, so public assistance will be required, which brings affordability goals, which means that these conversion projects will also help address the very real challenges of affordable housing, which Ann commented on. So, you know, it's one tool. It's not a silver bullet, as I said, but I think this issue, along with figuring out strategies to use our vacant storefront at the street and skyway level, are kind of two of the things that we really need to focus on and see more as opportunities for change as we develop a new downtown into our next season, as we like to say, as opposed to threats. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And every downtown in the country is dealing with these issues.
And to that point, you know, I think, Anne, your comment about development starting with a vision, starting with a larger purpose, and I think what Steve is leading with the Minneapolis Downtown Council and Strategic Plan for 2035 is going to create that vision. And I do believe, and I just like to reiterate what's been said already today, that we as a community have the potential to be leading the way and setting the stage for what other cities are doing around the country. I wanted to wrap this up with just an observation. And so when I look around the studio of designers and architects and landscape architects we have in Minneapolis, I see a certain type of person. And I think what I also see is that type of person in each of you. And I'm going to list what I see when I look around our studio in Minneapolis. I see design lovers. I see sustainability futurists. I see applied researchers. I see conscious bias busters. I see bold leaders. I see community activators. I see empathetic collaborators, Jen's point earlier, and I see balanced life livers. So I would just like to wrap this up and say thank you very much to Capital Analytics for allowing us to come up here and share some ideas. And thank you very much, Patrick and Tim and Steve. This has been a pleasure.